Saxon doesn't do drugs. No, I am the drug. Woo!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding TV, a podcast about television. Here's a bonus episode we're going to do for you guys today about the White Lotus Season 3, Episode 5, Full Moon Party. I'm here today with Sarah Marrs from Laney Gossip. Sarah, here's my question for you. Do you take drugs, or are you the drug? That's my question. When you go to a party, do you take drugs, or are you the drug?
Well, if the metric is Saxon Ratliff, I take drugs.
Fair enough. Sarah Marrs is very anti-Saxon Ratliff. Anyway, we're here to talk about Season 3, Episode 5 of The White Lotus. Just as FYI, we weren't originally sure if we were going to be able to do this podcast, but I am here in Colorado right now in a kind of mobile setup, and I have a mobile podcasting studio situation. We're able to do it. I do want to say there are 60-mile-per-hour winds whipping at this window right next to that I'm sitting next to right now. So if you hear some whistling, that's what that is. And sorry about that. It's just obviously I have my whole camera and my microphone and my laptop and everything ready to go. And then of course there's like tornado winds next to me. So sorry if you encounter that, but we're going to press on anyway. I do want to let people know also that we're probably going to record at least 2 more episodes we're going to try to cover every single episode left of the season, but we'll do at least 2 more, including next week's episode of The White Lotus and the finale. So let's get into it. Before we talk about this week's episode of The White Lotus, Sarah Marrs, let's just talk about a couple of things that happened in reaction to last week's episode of The White Lotus. First of all, we always love it when people email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. And somebody wrote in without naming who they are, so I'm not even going to, it's weird to not even have signed it with a name, even a fake one. But I'll just say their screen name is RNN. So RNN writes into decodingtv@gmail.com. Commenting on your remarks last week, Sarah Marrs, about how it's unrealistic that Belinda wouldn't have known about the murder that happened at the White Lotus in Italy. And this person writes into decodingtv@gmail.com, quote, "You would be surprised at the kinds of things that happen in the hospitality industry specifically where people stay overnight. I have had multiple experiences with robberies, suicides, overdoses, just to name a few. It's probably sheer luck that I didn't specifically have an experience with a confirmed murder, but I only worked at one hotel for 3 years. I can tell you that the ideas that employees would be gossiping about a murder that happened at a location in another country at the same resort chain is absolutely ludicrous. It's also very unlikely that any of the experiences I had at the hotel would end up on Yelp reviews. No one is trying to broadcast the things that happen to all the visitors to the resort. To the contrary, we would do everything we can to make sure they are unaware," end quote. Anyway, he then goes on to explain why they believe this is unrealistic. I think you and I had a similar reaction, which is in many industries, including hospitality, there is frequently a lot of gossip. So I don't think it was an unreasonable conclusion for us to come to. And in addition, this murder seemed like it was international news based on what we saw in the White Lotus Season 3.
Here's what I will give RNN is I think the situation in Maui with Armand is 100% cover-upable because it happened between 2 people in the privacy of a suite. I think they could get Armand out of the hotel. I think maybe some people who were staying there might have been aware that something happened because you might see the ambulance or the coroner's van or whatever. I think there's some, but I think they could kind of polish it as we've had a very tragic circumstance and we apologize for any inconvenience. This will be, gone in a few minutes. Is there anything we can do for you? I think you could smooth the Armand situation over, especially because I don't think they ended up pressing any charges in that situation. So that one I think it's containable.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
The Tanya McQuad death, we actually saw a Google search and there were numerous major mainstream media reports of what happened. And if you remember back to season 2, bodies washed up on the beach. Now, how much information can they cap? Maybe some, but dozens, if not hundreds of guests saw them removing bodies from the beach, and then it made international news because a person who died was a famous heiress. It would be like Paris Hilton in that circumstance, like people heard about it. So in the Armand thing, yes, I think they could contain that. I think they could polish it and smooth it over with guests, that it probably, outside of the people who worked with Armand and who knew him, maybe that doesn't really expand. But there is this thing that I like to think about called the gossip bubble. And I am the deputy editor of a website with gossip in the name. I've put a lot of thought into gossip and how it operates in our society. And the gossip bubble is how much information can you contain about a person or a situation. And there is always a point where you can't contain the bubble anymore and it will burst. Like an example would be when John F. Kennedy was president, a lot of information was contained. That was a large gossip bubble. And of course, now today, 50 whatever years later, we're aware of a lot of things that were not popularly reported during his lifetime. The bubble burst after he died and after there was a little less, I don't know if you want to call it decorum, but after there was a little less like preference given to the powerful in the press. The gossip bubble on the Tanya McQuad situation seems to have burst. It's international news. They're making a Hollywood movie about it. And Belinda knew her. And how many people in Belinda's life in Maui knew what happened? Because we do hear in this episode that it's been about a year since the events of season 1, and that Belinda's life was fairly significantly, at least temporarily, derailed by Tanya kind of breaking her heart over starting her own spa. So how many people in Belinda's life might have heard her talk about Tanya McQuad and then seen something online, seen something on social media and said, did you hear what happened? Like, I think for the sake of dramatic purpose for the show, we go along with it. Belinda didn't know. She's just discovered this information. Fine. It works within the logic of the moment. But like real world logic, I'm like, no, that gossip bubble burst. She definitely heard about this months ago.
I am inclined to fall on your side of this, Sarah Marrs, but certainly understand people's perspective. Some people also brought up like Belinda maybe didn't want to read about Tanya after that event, and that's understandable as well. But ultimately, I think you're right about this. That said, it's a fictional hotel, so we're only speculating. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of gossip, here is a headline from Variety. Jason Isaacs shuts down White Lotus penis question and says it's odd there's a double standard with male nude scenes. So this is a reference to the fact that on last week's episode of The White Lotus, Jason Isaacs plays a character who accidentally let his penis hang out in front of his family members. And they all freaked out and they were very upset about it. And there is some questions. There are some questions about whether or not this was a prosthetic penis. And on CBS Mornings, Jason Isaacs said, quote, a lot of people are debating it. It's all over the internet. And it's interesting because the best actress this year is Mikey Madsen at the Oscars. And I don't see anybody discussing her vulva, which is on screen all the time. It's interesting that there's a double standard for men. But when women are naked, Margaret Qualley as well in The Substance, nobody would dream of talking to her about her genitalia or her nipples or any of these things. So it's odd that there's a double standard, end quote. And I think he basically like took some offense at being asked the question of whether it was a prosthetic penis or not, which, by the way, we have apparently learned that it was. Sorry to spoil that illusion for everyone. And I'm of two minds about this topic, Sarah Marrs. On the one hand, I understand you're a performer. You're an actor. You're a serious, trained, like classically trained actor. You're out there trying to do publicity for your show, and people are just asking you about the prosthetic penis. It's insulting. It's beneath you. It's like, why? What am I doing here? What am I doing with my life? That like this has become my life. That people are asking me about if I'm hanging real dong or not. So yeah, I get it. On the other hand, I don't think it's quite fair to say there's a double standard in the sense that, first of all, I'm guessing a lot of those conversations did happen, just not necessarily in the places where Jason Isaacs frequents. And in general, our society has had a far more permissive view on female nudity than male nudity for the longest time, and actually arguably still to today. The number one thing you can do to your R-rated movie to make it rated NC-17 is show an erect penis. There are just very few erect penises shown in any films of any kind. And society, like the rating system, has deemed like, oh, that is the third rail, as it were. Can't touch that. And like, I think there is a double standard, but it's not necessarily quite in the way that Jason Isaacs is referring to. Sarah Marrs, was Jason Isaacs overreacting to this question?
No, I don't think he's overreacting. There is a double standard. I actually think there's two double standards, because there's the one you're talking about, which is, the most taboo thing is an erect male penis. But there's also the double standard he's talking about, which is women can be partially or fully nude in projects, in films and TV shows. And they're not necessarily going to get asked constantly. Like, people talked about Margaret Qualley. They talked about Mikey Madison being naked, because there are people who will talk about that. I think it's a boring conversation. I haven't heard anyone say anything of substance or new about it in a very long time, but they will talk about it. But what they did not do is ask Margaret Qualley if she was wearing prosthetic boobs. She did wear a prosthetic butt for some of the close-ups, because they wanted it to move in a certain way that human flesh doesn't necessarily move, which is just an interesting piece of filmmaking.
But you're right. You're right that like she's not being asked this like on late night shows all the time or whatever.
She's not appearing on Jimmy Kimmel and he's asking if those are prosthetic boobs. Like, that's not the conversation that's being had. But whenever a man does full frontal nudity, they will always ask if it's a prosthetic penis. And it's a very prurient question, and I think it's mostly motivated by people wanting to know if they're that blessed in real life, because we very rarely see unendowed gentlemen when they do full frontal nudity, and if they are, true. It's usually a joke. So I do think there is a little bit of a double standard there, where a woman can get naked and they're not necessarily asked about it, where a man will always be asked about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. Anyway, just some brief reflections on Jason Isaacs' penis as we move on into this week's episode of The White Lotus. All right, Sarah Marrs, let's talk about it. This week's episode of The White Lotus, Season 3, Episode 5, Full Moon Party. What did you think overall of the episode?
I like this episode. I feel like we have sort of crossed the meridian, and the momentum is now like we've gathered it all up. If we're on a roller coaster, last episode, we sort of hit the top, and now we're starting that downhill descent. This feels like the moment on a roller coaster when you start going down, but you just hang for the briefest moment and then it all unleashes. I feel like that was this moment of just that millisecond of air of hang time, and then we're off to the races.
I mean, stuff is already happening, like if lines are being crossed and deeds are being performed that probably can't be taken back. So yeah, I thought it was a very solid episode. And one of the things I really appreciated about the episode, in my opinion, is how sinister the episode made all this partying look and feel. There's something evil or wrong about it.
I wanted to bring up the music in context to the party scenes, because we were talking in our initial conversation that even though this is the same composer that has been doing the music for the first two episodes, the music in season 3 has not felt as much of it's a character of its own. It hasn't felt as central as it has in the past. In this episode, I think it absolutely is, because those are like good dance beats, but they are troubling and dark. Like, you don't want to dance to that music.
Indeed. So yeah, I kind of like that it frames the actions of these tourists in this kind of like depravity, basically. That's kind of interesting in like aesthetically now it's framed in the show. Anyway, let's talk about some of the stuff that happened this episode as the situations are rapidly developing. The Ratliff brothers are partying with Chloe and Chelsea. The Nightmare Girl group is partying with Valentin and his Russian friends. And you can't help but wonder what their mornings after will look like. Let's talk about some of these mornings after. Let's start with the girl group. After partying at night, Jacqueline invites Valentin back to bed with her, and they have sex. And that is a big deal because we know that she's married and she's cheating on her husband. But the way this whole thing unfolded, I thought was really pretty funny. Like, just first of all, there's just one of the friends that's like much more of a downer than the other two guys, right? He's always he's talking about his traumatic childhood and everything.
Yeah,
and
I think played for laughs, but it's pretty dark.
It is extremely dark. But we've all I don't know, like it captures like when you're with a group of friends and you go out and you meet another group of people, and it's like one of the people is clearly like much less fun than the other people. Like, and it's very awkward because you're like, oh man, I kind of wish I was hanging out with the other people. I think it does a good job of capturing that dynamic. And just like the night is very unpredictable. At one point, those women, I couldn't get the Google Translate running in time to figure out what that woman was screaming at those guys, but some really fun stuff here, and clearly also what you also see is Michelle Monaghan's character and Carrie Coon's character are like, this is fun, I'm having a blast, and Leslie Bibb's character is like, we're too old for this shit. Like, let's just, like some of the group want to recapture the flame of their youth, and the other one's like, let's just be realistic and go to sleep, please, because like I'm tired, right? And I like that the episode captures the dynamic between those things. What did you think, Sarah Marrs?
Well, I think it's notable that Jacqueline sleeps with Valentin, and she's been encouraging Lori to pursue him.
Yeah.
Which I was like, oh, this was your high school dynamic. You slept with every boy she liked.
Yeah.
Like this is who you were in high school. It's who you are in your 40-somethings. Which again, these women, they made me so sad. I do think it goes back to last week, though. The idea that Kate is sort of the less, I don't want to say that she's the bummer friend, because she's willing to go out. She just doesn't want to get drunk out of her gourd. She's not interested in these young guys rolling up on them.
Yeah, I mean, she goes to church, right? Like I
think that it's not so much that like, oh, she has a morality or whatever. I think it's more Kate has a community in her life that maybe Lori and Jacqueline don't.
Yeah.
And so this is not fulfilling anything for her, because for her, her real life is back home with her family in her church community. And there's stuff there to contemplate and to wonder about. But at the same time, I'm like, I think Kate is maybe fulfilled on a level that perhaps no one at the White Lotus except for Chelsea is. I feel like Kate and Chelsea are holding it down in a way that nobody else is, because they're the only ones that aren't completely spiraling out at this point.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sarah. And perhaps Carrie Coon and Michelle Monaghan are looking for fulfillment in something else that maybe cannot provide it, which, by the way, big theme of the episode. All right, let's talk about briefly what happens with the Ratliff brothers, who hang out with Chloe and Chelsea. Some real incestuous vibes going on this episode. There's this moment when Lachlan like reaches out and like tousles his hair a little bit while they're watching the fireworks, then they kiss. And it's like, wonder if that's going to escalate. Yeah.
I mean, this is a family with terrible boundaries. Like, they have the worst boundaries. They all need therapy. There has been a vibe. I mean, since the moment Saxon showed up, I was like, not good. And he was inappropriate with Lachlan multiple times. So the fact that this is like happening, I'm like, well, I mean, we were kind of seeing some red flags that nobody else was paying attention to in terms of the world of the show. So yeah, but I think we all kind of knew this was coming, and I do feel like this is sort of, early on I said I think Mike White might be trying to get his own show canceled. And this is why I thought that, because I'm like, ooh, people are not going to roll with this. People aren't going to want to put in the critical thinking required to process this plot turn. Same feeling for Sam Rockwell's character. I'm like, I don't think people are going to want to actually think about what he's saying. They're going to get hung up on the surface details. And with the Ratliff brothers, I'm like, it's very troubling. It's very upsetting. It's a very dark storyline. But I do think it kind of speaks to not only the lack of boundaries that this family has, but lacking good exterior relationships. Like, kind of saying about like Kate, she's not searching for something. There's nothing. It doesn't seem like she's trying to fill a hole the way that Lori and Jacqueline are. And so she's not really enjoying their night out the way that they are, because it's not offering her anything that she needs.
Right.
And
you need to have friends who in your actual life, not on vacation, will say, that's messed up. Don't do that. Right.
Yeah.
These people don't have that in their lives.
And Saxon does not have, he's striking out with women. He's tall and he's handsome and he's rich. He should be able to persuade some woman to sleep with him, and he can't. He's just striking out left, right, and center. Chelsea is barely tolerating him. But he also doesn't seem like, does he have friends? Because the way he talks about people when he's talking to Lachlan about most people just want to be used. It's like, no, most people just want to pay their bills. Like, most people are just trying to get through the day. Also, most people don't have the power that you were born into. Their last names don't matter. They don't have the money that you have. And how many people do you know that work for you? Like, what is Saxon's life? I think it's probably a nightmare. I think he probably does not have friends, and he doesn't have any real positive relationships except with his blender and his protein shakes. Some of the stuff he has said, I'm like, this is a guy who's listening to a lot of Manosphere podcasts. And so I'm not really surprised that he's getting inappropriate with his brother, because I'm like, where are his relationships? Like, he doesn't have good boundaries with his family. When you compound that with someone who seems to have some sexual hangups, there seems to be something psychosexual happening with him that we're just seeing flashes of it. We haven't really gotten into it. Maybe we never will, but like, there seems to be something there. Like when he says he's like, oh, I want to go after her because she's mean to me. And I like it. He's like, I like, it's a challenge. I'm like, or do you just like it when a woman's a little bit mean to you? And that's totally fine. Some people
to be fair, a lot of guys like that. But yes,
yeah, it's totally fine and normal.
I don't dispute anything else you're saying. So,
but he just seems to have a psychosexual hang up, and then you compound that with the lack of boundaries, and you compound that with the substances that they're imbibing and the general atmosphere. It's like, of course they crossed this line. Of course they did. And I feel like if he had a more even keel, there would be better boundaries in place. He wouldn't need the sheer amount of intimacy that Saxon seems to need. And he's trying to get it through sex. But I don't think that's actually what he's looking for. I think he's just desperate for some sort of outward connection to something bigger, which is like the overarching theme of the whole season, is this spirituality and searching and hollowness and fulfillment or lack of fulfillment. And the only person who seems really fulfilled is Kate, who did specifically say she goes to church. She has a community. Saxon, I think he just doesn't have a community. And you just add all those other factors into it. It's like, yeah, from the moment he showed up and masturbated in front of his baby brother, it's like something bad is going to happen because he's weird and he doesn't have boundaries.
No disagreement here. I am very curious if there's going to be any self-realization, but I doubt it. Moving on, back at the resort, Piper finally admits to her parents that she isn't writing a thesis, but is considering spending a year in a meditation center. Also, Timothy contemplates suicide. So let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, I was actually genuinely shocked that there was no thesis. That seemed like a big betrayal. And it was really funny to hear her mom's reactions to like, like her being a Buddhist. Like, you can't really be Buddhist. You're not like Chinese. I thought that was very funny. And how like she sees her world as so separated from the world that they're in. Like, they are such outsiders that she can't contemplate like her daughter being Buddhist or really buying into this way of life, and just finding it like there's a lot of like othering, and this is very strange going on from the Parker Posey character, which I think is all feels very authentic. So I appreciate all that stuff, and I do really think Jason Isaacs is probably doing the most when it comes to the performance this season. When it comes to any actor performance this season, he has the most interesting work to deal with, which is like his whole life is self-destructing. You see his wife talking about like, what is everyone going to think when they find out our daughter is coming to a meditation temple? And it's like, you're going to be praying for the time when that was your biggest problem in your life. Like you're going to, this will be the good old days when you were looking back and seeing like that was a good thing to deal with at the time. Sarah Marrs, any thoughts on the other Ratliffs this week?
I do agree. I think Jason Isaacs is just giving a masterclass because it would be easy for this to be a one-note performance, because Timothy, from the moment he learns of the financial situation unfolding outside the resort, he's essentially, that's his level. and it would be easy to just sort of coast. But I feel like every second he's on screen, he is giving us so much information, so much texture and color to the performance. I actually find myself liking Timothy. Like by the end of episode, now we're 5 hours with these people, and I'm like, okay, I hated Saxon from minute one. I still hate him. I didn't have an opinion on Fabian, but now I hate him. I still love Belinda. She's a ray of sunshine. Timothy, I'm like, in another show, he would be the big bad, but I feel like he's almost the emotional heart of the show. And Jason Isaacs is doing such a good job. It's a beautiful performance. That's why I said, like, maybe just go ahead and engrave that Emmy. I know he's got stiff competition, but like, are we going to see a better performance? Because, and we still have 4 more hours. 3 more hours to go. Math was not my strong suit. So it's like, I think I love the Timothy scenes, even though they are objectively very sad and heavy, and there's suicidal ideation in this episode. And that's very difficult to think that he would think the situation is so irretrievable that would be the only solution is sad. But God, Jason Isaacs is just so good.
Indeed. Completely agreed. There is a song that he sings during this episode. Lo, how a rose ere blooming.
How a rose ere blooming.
Which is the song that is sung at the end credits. I don't know if you caught that, right? But he starts like singing and his daughter's like, please stop doing this. And I'm reading here from Wikipedia that hymn was a hymn. It was originally written with 2 verses that describe the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah foretelling the birth of Jesus. It emphasizes the royal genealogy of Jesus and Christian messianic prophecies. The hymn describes a rose sprouting from the stem of the tree of Jesse, a symbolic device that depicts the descent of Jesus from Jesse of Bethlehem, the father of King David. The image was especially popular in medieval times, and it features in many works of religious art from the period. End quote. So, what is the significance of any of that? I'm just gonna wildly speculate, Sarah. I have no idea what any of this is possibly meaning, but I think the idea of Jesus being from the lineage of David and Isaiah is like, oh wow, like this rose has sprouted up from this branch. It's like a thing of hope, right? It's like a sign of hope that like for saving humanity. And the episode does end with him praying to God, and then cut to credits, and that hymn plays, and he's basically like searching for that kind of same hope to come out of this. You know, he has a very not messianic line, but obviously a very distinguished lineage, and so he needs some hope to spring up in some form or another.
I remain unconvinced that he's actually going to get into trouble. Like, we haven't heard a peep on that. Like, there was a little bit of his lawyer being like, you might want to make a deal. And it's like, yeah. But now it's radio silence. And I'm like, I wonder if at the end of all of this, it just sort of works out.
Well, yeah.
Or if he's able to somehow present himself as a dupe. It might, in this situation, it might be better to present himself as a dupe and just take it on the chin that, like, I got suckered. That is embarrassing. But you know what's more embarrassing? Losing all your money and going to jail. So, so, you know, I do think, like, and I was talking to somebody at my work about this, and they're like, do we know what he really did? Because, like, what's the scale of the guy's crime? Are we talking like Bernie Madoff and he cheated a lot of people out of money? I'm like, no, all we really hear is that he only made $10 million, which for these people is pocket change. And it seems like he maybe co-signed a deal or was somehow tangentially involved in something that ended up, and maybe he thought it was kind of shady, but he maybe didn't know the extent of it until now when it's blowing up. I'm like, so I don't think it's a Bernie Madoff situation. I think it's more of like he kind of just trusted the wrong person.
I think that's all accurate. You know, it reminds me a lot of the Martha Stewart insider trading, which, like, the short version, in my opinion, is that what she did was not a big deal at all, and like they clearly just wanted to go after her. And it struck me as that kind of situation where it's like, okay, yes, he made a little money, but he didn't even know that he was duping people. Like, he didn't even know that he was doing anything wrong. So anyway, that was my like that's my real life analog, is in my head canon. It's like a Martha Stewart insider trading situation.
Yeah, well, I think there might still be like a moment where we realize, like, oh, they're gonna be fine.
yeah, we'll see. That is Sarah's prediction. And
But
at this, go ahead.
I do think him singing the hymn he was specifically talking to Piper.
Yeah.
The truth has come out. She wants to go to this meditation center for a year. And Victoria's reaction, obviously she's worried about what will people think. I'm like, it's 2025. They're going to be like, oh, you have a weird daughter? So do I. It's not a big deal. But, Piper says you didn't raise us to be particularly Christian. And then Timothy comes back with, I was an altar boy when I was a child. And he's reflecting on it fondly. So I think part of that is this overarching theme of spirituality and searching. When he was a child, when he was involved in that community, it gave him something that he found fulfilling. And as an adult, he has lost that thing. And now in his hour of need, he's singing the hymn and praying, which let's assume he hasn't done that in a while. And I do think one thing that's interesting about this season of The White Lotus, I will be curious if we continue to see more about how they portray Buddhism, because we're seeing it from a very Western perspective, which is white people looking for something they're not getting in mainstream American culture.
Yeah.
But I would be interested if we get to see more of it, like a fuller picture of it, because I think there is a sort of non-judgment on the belief system in terms of whether it's a Christian church or a Buddhist temple. You need something. I think what Mike White is saying up to this point is the only people that seem to have any sort of balance in their life, any sort of fulfillment, are the ones that have a belief system, whether it's Judeo-Christian or Eastern, that connects them to something larger than themselves. And I hope we see a little bit more of the Eastern side of it, because we have seen such a Western slant on it. And I would just be curious, do we get a more full picture of what that really is? Because I don't think he's trying to pit one belief system against the other.
I agree.
I think he's just saying, I don't care what it is, guys, but you gotta believe in something. You've got to connect yourself to the universe in a greater, larger way, or you turn into these creatures. Look how unhappy they all are.
I'm not sure if I agree that is kind of him advocating for it. I think he is at least recognizing that people do reach for that
maybe
in moment of need, right?
Maybe it's not an advocation for it, but it's at least saying, these people are getting something out of this.
Right, sure.
That is a net positive in their life.
Well, it remains to be seen, but we'll see. But anyway, great point, Sarah. Really appreciate you bringing that up. Before we get to the final plotline, Sarah Marrs, I want to let people know we got a lot of people watching these videos on YouTube at youtube.com/@decodingtv. Our statistics tell us that about 60% of those people don't actually subscribe. Hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a subscribe. You'll get more recaps and reviews like this one. You can also listen to the podcast version of Decoding TV wherever podcasts can be found. Sarah Marrs, let people know where they can find more of your work on the internet this week.
You can find me on laneygossip.com or the Substack The Squawk, and I am intermittently on Letterboxd, Instagram, Blue Sky as @Cinesnark.
All right, let's talk about the final plot lines. This episode, Sarah Marrs, Rick is in Bangkok, connecting with an old friend played by Sam Rockwell. Sam Rockwell details a descent into overindulgence and sexual exploration and how he crashed and burned and ended up sober, celibate, and a Buddhist. He also gives Rick a bag with what he asked for, which we later learn contains at least one gun. So, Sam Rockwell, obviously a brilliant actor who is Leslie Bibb's real-life romantic partner. So maybe he's like, hey, I'm going to be in town anyway. Do you guys want to shoot something?
I would really like to know, did they do this just because he was there and available? But he's one of my favorite actors. Sam Rockwell is one of those people who shows up and whatever he's in is immediately 20% better. This is a great example.
It's an incredible monologue that comes out of nowhere. You're not expecting it at all. And it's really intense. I mean, Walton Goggins' performance, honestly, during it is also very good because he's just you can see all the synapses firing of I need to be a supportive friend because literally he needs Sam Rockwell's assistance. We later learn, but also this is really outside of the scope of what I thought my friend would ever be into. My favorite detail about it is when they first sit down, Sam Rockwell orders chamomile tea, which is kind of like the one thing that is like the opposite of everything else. Like everyone in the show is doing is like chamomile tea. And, they're taking pills, they're drinking stuff out of a seashell. Like, I just love that chamomile tea was kind of the thing that tipped him off that something was
I
different.
actually had a thought about that, and I know why that worked. There is a video essayist on YouTube named Sloane Stowe, and she did an essay on The Mentalist, which was a CBS procedural that ran for years. And she specifically mentions that the main character drinks tea frequently and often, and he's enthusiastic about it. Like he goes out of his way to acquire tea, and he drinks it from a dainty little cup. And she made a really great point in her essay, which is why I can never fully write off YouTube, because there are some smart people doing great work. Besides Decoding TV, there's like so many smart people making great observations.
There's other channels other than Decoding TV? I don't understand this.
But she made this great point about how in the US and North American culture, I'm not going to say Western culture at large, because in the UK, in Europe, in Australia, which the main character in The Mentalist is played by an Australian actor, drinking tea is very normal. It's a lot of people drink tea. It's not, I don't think people really think about drinking tea as much as in the US. It is very feminine coded. Tea parties are a thing that little girls do. Women drink tea. Men don't drink tea, especially hot brewed tea. Men drink coffee. Coffee is the drink of the working man, And so the minute he said chamomile tea, I was like, feminine coded, and the red flag went up. And you see it in Walton Goggins' face. He's immediately like latching on. What is this about? Why are you drinking tea? And the fact that he didn't order, when you're sober, there's so many he didn't order water. He didn't order club soda. He didn't order juice, tea. He asked for hot tea, which is feminine coded in American/Hollywood media.
Yeah.
Shout out to Sloane Stowe for making that great observation about how we're going to interpret a character drinking tea.
Sarah, I want to ask what you made of this monologue, but I'll just put out what I made of it. Okay, because people are going to watch this episode and they may or may not listen to this podcast, and they'll be wondering what the hell was that all about. And my interpretation is we see in many White Lotus episodes, not even just in this season, but just like many White Lotus episodes, like people, Americans, mostly white people, partying away, like trying to like reach some form of transcendence in their lives and trying to like achieve some experience that's beyond their current level of understanding, whether it's taking drugs and dancing at a club or going canoeing or whatever. Sorry, not canoeing. Whatever the sport was in season 1, right? Like where they're out in the boats.
It was outrigger canoeing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I think what Sam Rockwell's character, like the function of that character, is essentially what is the logical extreme version of that? Like, what is the logical endpoint of like, hey, I'm going to go out and I have lots of money and I have endless time and I'm just gonna fuck everything. Like, I'm just gonna like, and at the end of the day, like putting aside for one moment the sort of gender bending components of his speech, I think like the main takeaway I had was that there is like ultimately at the end of that no fulfillment. Like that at the end you realize like it's just hunger and nothing else. And that ultimately like it will not satisfy. The things people do to like fill their needs will not ultimately satisfy. And he had to like reconsider his entire worldview in order to achieve any kind of normal functionality. Again, I didn't touch on the sort of transgender sort of ladyboy components of it, and that is a rich area to mine, but that was kind of my initial take. Sarah Marrs, your reaction to Sam Rockwell's monologue?
I thought it was amazing. And again, I'm like, maybe go ahead and engrave that guest actor drama Emmy.
Yeah,
Although I was like, I don't know, will the monologue be too risque or will they go ahead and give it to him? I I actually don't really think it's about the sexual exploration so much. I'm afraid people are going to get hung up on those details. I'm afraid they're going to get
You said that. You said that. What do you?
Wait, is he saying that he's transgender? Is that what this is about? It's like, I don't think so. And I don't even really think that's what he's saying. I just think he's saying like, I had all of these different thoughts about myself and my identity. And I was trying, as he says, he's trying to fuck his way to the answer. And I actually think the monologue is beautiful. It's delivered impeccably. I think it's very much about what you're talking about he's a cautionary tale. Like I tried to fill the void with all of this stuff and it didn't work. And sort of to the larger point, now he's connecting himself into a worldview, a belief system that gives him, he is one piece of a larger puzzle, you know, and the idea that I have to be all things and I have to be capable of generating all of my fulfillment. It's like, no, it can come from outside too. And if you plug yourself into a belief system that fulfills that for you, it takes some of that burden off of you. And I think that's what he's expressing is, you know, he's given all of this stuff up. He's trying to lead a different life. And this is leading him maybe to the fulfillment that he was missing. But I do think in terms of like narrative function, especially because we know Rick is on this quest, he's trying to achieve something.
Yeah.
I think, and his friend is unnamed, so I'm kind of just going to call him Sam Rockwell. I think Sam Rockwell is sort of a Virgil character where he's guiding his friend through a descent. He describes his own descent. I have been on my journey and come out the other side, and now I'm a tea-drinking Buddhist celibate. And now Rick is going on his journey, and Sam Rockwell is accompanying him as a Virgil character, which in Dante's Inferno, Virgil, the Roman poet, guides Dante through the 9 circles of hell. So I think we're literally going on Rick's descent and he's got his guide figure accompanying him.
Right. And at the end of his journey, he wasn't like, and that was all worth it, right? Like, he's like, hey, I had to find my fulfillment in something that is different than what I originally thought it would be. So anyway, those are our thoughts. I don't want to like minimize the gender components of it because I do think that is significant. Like, there's something about that like I think is important to kind of him feeling like he is not like his true form, you know, in some way. But anyway, if people have thoughts they want to share with us on what their reactions were, we'd love to read them. decodingtv@gmail.com.
I mean, a lot of that depends on like how much more of this character are we going to get. Like, he doesn't have a name. He seems to be serving a specific function as part of Rick's journey. So are we going to get to go off and like, if it really felt like the minute he showed up, he was walking in from a different season of the White Lotus. Like there's another whole story happening and we're only getting this little piece of it.
Agreed.
But I do think I'm just worried people are going to get hung up on discussing like, ooh, gross. He had gay sex and thought about being a woman. And it's like, no, he was seeking and literally nothing. He tried it all. He tasted the rainbow and nothing fulfilled him. And that's the whole point of this show.
Agreed. I will say you're not imitating our audience, Sarah Marrs, who are very intelligent and thoughtful. So, but yes, I think that reaction will be out there, and that would be unfortunate. Okay, let's talk about the rest of the stuff that happens this episode. Belinda tells Fabian about her suspicions regarding Gary Gregg. Fabian blows her off. Not cool. He dismisses her legitimate concerns for her own safety, as well as Gary Gregg being wanted for questioning in Sicily as gossip. Clearly, Fabian's not going to do anything. So while Belinda is trying to expand her skills and have a nice romance with Pornchai, Fabian's out here actually potentially risking her life. Anyway, it's kind of nice. The Belinda Pornchai romance seems kind of sweet.
They're so cute.
Yeah.
They're so cute.
They're cute. Yeah.
And he chases the lizard out of her hotel room.
Yes.
He got a little hero moment.
There you go. We haven't really talked about, by the way, like how guy talk kind of sucks in this episode. That like he tries to get the gun back, he fails. Like he's
not cut out for this job.
He's not doing great.
He's really, I don't like, he's too nice of a person. He doesn't have the sort of forceful personality. Like you meet his boss and that guy seems 100% capable of handling the gun and stopping people at the gate and all of that. Guy talk, I'm like, is there something else you can do at this resort? Like, you're too nice for this. And the truth is, though, that's probably like the best job on the island. Like, it's, so it's, I don't want him to lose his job because I'm like, probably one of the better jobs to have. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't think you're cut out for it. You're just not the personality.
Any other thoughts on the episode, Sarah Marrs?
Well, I think Fabian sucks. I like the fury I felt. I was so mad at him for condescending to guy talk, but I did think that moment again illustrates the power structures that these resorts create, where you have a white European talking down to the brown local. And it's like, probably you're standing on land that should be his. Like this is a bad dynamic and all of these things are kind of in play. But then when he blows off Belinda's concern, specifically when he says we don't gossip about guests, I'm like, that's not gossip. Gossip is, did you hear what happened to Tanya McQuoid? They're saying she got murdered. That's gossip.
I think he's trying to maintain a good reputation for his White Lotus, right? And he's doing so at the cost of his guest safety. He's doing it so at
the personal safety of an employee and potentially guests. Because when you go to, and I unfortunately had a situation where I had to go to my boss and we had headshots on our company website. And I said, like, I don't want to totally get into it, but I need to have my headshot it's not safe for me to have my picture on the internet in that way. And for someone who writes on the internet and has been doing so for 15 years, there aren't that many pictures of me on the internet. And it's because I had to clean that up for a situation in my real life. And so when she went to him and was like, I don't feel safe. I think this person is dangerous. He's wanted for questioning in this very serious incident. Should we call the authorities? That is the moment when you say the reputation of the hotel doesn't matter because the bigger picture is this person could be dangerous. We are calling the authorities. And the way that Fabian is like, oh, we don't talk about the guests and don't gossip. And I think you're just blowing it out of proportion. I'm like, if she dies because of you, if she or her son, he's coming. Her son is coming. Like, if something happens to Belinda or her family or Porn Chai because of you, because you didn't do anything in this moment, I'm going to be so fucking furious. But I think I understand you're the general manager of this kind of resort, and you do have, and I think we saw it with Valentina specifically dealing with some shady characters around her hotel and, things like that, that you do want to maintain a sort of professionalism. And you do want to maintain the good reputation of the hotel. But I do think when someone comes to you and says, this person is wanted for questioning in connection to a very serious crime, and I'm worried that he knows that I know who he is because I think he's dangerous. That is when you start you can take them quietly. I'm not saying he needs to pull the fire alarm and empty the resort, but that is the moment when you start, okay, let's figure out what the next step is, because there should be one. The answer should not be, act like everything is normal. It will be fine. You're blowing it out of proportion. How many times have women been told that in history and then something terrible happens? So I just hate Fabian.
Indeed. All right. Pretty solid episode. I have a feeling more sparks are going to fly in the next few episodes. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.